How's it going, guys? My name is Tavarish, and welcome to my second channel, where we take a more behind-the-scenes and technical look at stuff I do on my main channel. Now, you will have seen what we did to my P1's engine harness. Actually, not the engine harness, the entire wiring harness for that car. But I wanted to tell you guys exactly what we had to do to get that wiring harness to where it was. We're still not done with it, but I wanted to go over it with Adam, the guy who's actually making the wiring harness, because it is a lot of work. So in this video, we're gonna be telling you everything it takes to make a hypercar wiring harness from scratch.
Yeah.
Right here is the actual P1 wiring harness. And yes, we can technically use this, put this back in the car and try to start it, but we would have a ton of electrical issues, wouldn't we?
One or two.
One or two, yeah.
One or two.
Well, the reason why is because when you have a harness like this that went into salt water, you have corrosion. I don't know if you can see this.
This one's pretty good.
Okay.
These ones are pretty obvious. You can see how green it is in there.
Yeah, there's a lot of green corrosion here. You could actually clean this off and try to put some pins in here. The issue that you'll deal with is that all the corrosion starts wicking up the wire or wicking down the wire, and you'll have corrosion maybe here, maybe down here. You don't know until you start taking the wires all apart until you basically don't have any wires left. So in order not to do this for the entire harness with thousands and thousands of pins, is that we're making our own wiring harness. And oh boy, okay. Actually, Mike Brewer, when he came by when we were filming Wheeler Dealers, he looked at the wiring harness and he just went, ah! So that's what normal people think when they see this. This is quite possibly the biggest project anybody's ever taken on, in YouTube, and this is your project. Like, Adam is solely responsible for this wiring harness. Now, I've been here to like help him along and stuff, but he's the guy. Like, if this thing burns to the ground,
my fault. For sure.
Your fault.
Yeah.
100%.
So always blame the tuner or the wiring guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
What if it's the same person? Then it has to be. It's just 200% your fault.
Yeah, 100% guaranteed. It's definitely my fault.
Well, no, we've actually been working together because we have had to decipher a lot of McLaren wiring diagrams, and we've taken 3 wiring diagrams and put them together, and we're going to get into all that. So now that you can see this giant problem we have on our hands with this wiring harness, in order for you to avoid this kind of issue, you guys need to do research on the cars you buy, and the best way to do that is with Car Vertical. Car Vertical is the best vehicle history report you can buy for your car today. Not only is it priced the best, but it actually gives you the most comprehensive information. You can see if the car's been in an accident, in a flood, in a fire. If it's been in a salvage lot, you can also see the damage, so you can compare the car now to what it was before. Now, one of my favorite features of Car Vertical is its mileage discrepancy tool. It gives you a really cool graph and lets you know if your mileage has been tampered with or if it's just put in the system incorrectly. Now, it's a way that I know that my McLaren actually has 315 miles and 500 nautical yards. But I know that I don't have to worry about anything else other than the fact that the car was underwater. Now, if you want to get your Car Vertical history report, and you definitely should, go to the link in my video description and you can select Tavarish to get 20% off. That is the discount code Tavarish. It's in the link in the description below. Go check it out. It's totally worth it right now. When you first started on this, what did you have to do?
Yeah, so, well, Freddie had this lovely P1 harness out on a table and said, can you make this work? And I kindly declined to try to do that because it's a terrible idea.
Right.
But he had these other 2 harnesses. He had the 650S harness and the 720S harness, which looked a lot better than they do right now because I've torn them apart. But he asked if we could make the 2 of those and put them together and make a P1 harness out of it. And that was a less terrible idea.
Okay. Why is that a less terrible idea? Because you have, my idea was we would have a newer car and an older car, and both these cars are not the P1, but based on what I know about McLaren is that they reuse a lot of connectors, they reuse a lot of wire colors, and we could sort of cannibalize the two harnesses and make them into one usable harness. And that sort of, kind of worked. Now, what Adam did was he had to put this harness on this giant table. It's actually 4 tables put together, and then he taped this this piece of paper on the table, and then he laid out every connector with the connector, how many wires there are, what the connector number is, and then he'll basically trace this back to these guys, the wiring diagrams that we have from McLaren. And not only that, you also made your own sort of wiring, like schematics and diagrams, right?
Yeah, so I spent probably 2 weeks having to make diagrams for the P11 and the P1, where P11 is 650S, P1 is P12 or Product 12. But I had to make connector pinouts for all of the pass-through connectors because McLaren weren't kind enough to do that for me. So I had to go to those connectors and search through the document and basically create my own pinout of every single pass-through connector in each of the cars.
And what do you mean when you mean pass-through connectors? What does that mean?
So pass-through connectors are basically, instead of a connector ending at like a sensor or an output, it passes through a connector to a different part of the car.
So it's like a sub-harness. So you have the main harness, and you have a sub-harness that leads to a component, whether it's, it goes to a fan or like the transmission or something like that. This would actually be a really good, like right here. This would be a pass-through connector, wouldn't it? Like one of these guys?
Yeah, those guys.
Yeah, so one of these is a pass-through connector, and this goes to a sub-harness that leads to the back of the car. I think these are for transmission, right?
No, those are rear
aerodynamics. Okay,
Yep.
so this is transmission.
That's the TCU.
Yes, so this is transmission control unit, and then there's another one that actually goes to the transmission. It's all very complicated, but also simple at the same time. So this is
the dash harness.
okay.
But this would be an example of a sub harness that's in the car, and then you have like these bigger connectors where all the wires pass from the main harness to the dash harness, and these are the connectors that I had to basically create pinouts for, times about 50 per car.
Yeah.
So it was time consuming.
Every time you create a connector, we have a few options. So we could just take the connector off of the existing harness, depin it, and then repin it. Like we have pins like this, these tiny, tiny little pins. And then what you essentially have to do is put in, you strip down the wire, put the wire in there, and use a special crimping tool like this guy, and like that. Ooh, this is satisfying.
It's a big one.
Yeah, this is a big chungus right here. So that is what you have to do, except for the fact that it actually takes a lot of time to depin this. And once these pins are in, they're actually a little hard to take out because it's a McLaren, it's made of plastic, and sometimes plastic gets brittle and breaks. So we opted to, instead of taking depinning a lot of this stuff, we just got brand new connectors for a lot.
Correct. For a lot of what we could, which is another super time consuming thing, is figuring out what the connectors are and then sourcing them and all of the pieces and parts that go in, because you don't just pick a connector and it comes with everything you need.
Yeah.
You get a connector body, and then sometimes you have to buy the connector lock, and then you have to buy the seals. Sometimes there's more than one size seal in a connector body, so then you need both sizes of seals, both sizes of pins, and it's a whole thing, and every single one is different. So there is days of finding connectors, sourcing connectors, ordering stuff, waiting for it to be delivered. It's a big process.
And we're also trying to do things just like they would be done at McLaren. So when you look at something like this, you see these twisted pairs of wires. And the reason why they're twisted pairs is because one of them is a ground. And when they twist them like this, the ground actually acts sort of as a shield for that signal wire. And you can see how many twisted pairs there are. So poor Adam here was just like twisting wires.
Twisting by hand.
Just like twisting by hand. You could use a drill and you could twist them.
You totally could.
Yeah, but I mean, I feel like it's all, you know, all these twists are very uniform. You don't have one that's like just like, oh, I overcooked that one.
Yeah, overdid it. Yeah, exactly. You can definitely, you know, stretch the wire. You can pull pins out of the connector if you go overboard, and drills will generally have uneven twists. So you want it to be as even and consistent as possible. Doing it by hand is really the only way. So it's the only correct way.
So I did cover this in the P1 video, but we are going to be lopping off this right here. And not only this, but each corner of the wiring harness. So the rear left, rear right, front left, front right, they're all going to have these connectors that Adam has right here. These are really cool. So they're called mil-spec, and they are bulkhead connectors. One side goes on one end of the firewall, and the other side goes on the other. And they are very cool. They are kind of go just one way, right? Okay, and twist like that. And if you look at how the connector is, now this is not the connector we're going to be using, but you can see that there's pins over here, there's pins on this side, and this is anodized aluminum. These are very, very expensive. Now this one's not super expensive, but the ones we're going to be using are probably going to be $200 each, and we need like 8 of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
More or less.
Yeah, so we need 2 per corner because we just have that many wires. And this is also going to allow us to do something that no McLaren has ever done, and that is have a modular wiring harness, meaning that if we have any problems with this wiring or that wiring or the wiring in the middle, we can just decouple that from the entire harness, work on it independently, put it back, and then test things. We'll also have things like, well, these are going to be natural test ports. So, you know, we can just go straight to here, see if we have continuity on the other end. This allows us to do quite a bit that we couldn't do before. And it also allows us to use all of our wiring here to our full advantage, meaning that before, the idea was that we were going to have an entire wiring harness in one piece. That introduces a big problem, right?
Yeah. It's the problem is everything in the 650S and the 720S is in different locations than it was on the P1. So there's stuff that has to be shortened, stuff that has to be lengthened. Anything that has to be lengthened, obviously you don't have enough wire there, so you then have to replace that entire piece of wire or splice in a piece to make it long enough, which is less than ideal.
Yes.
So the goal of doing this was to be able to eliminate having to cut and splice anything. Everything will be a straight home run, and the only cuts and splices will be at the bulkheads.
Yes. And the reason why you don't want to splice or cut or have any solder joints or whatever is because you are introducing points of failure. And we already have enough points of failure with the stock harness. I think introducing more is not better. But these technically are introducing points of failure because, I mean, each pin could fail, but this is giving us a lot more latitude in that we can lay out the harnesses exactly the way we need, and it allows us to not have to waste so much wire trying to make one whole harness. Now we can cut this, and if we have a length of wire, it won't need to be that long, and we can just run, like, I think the middle is going to be the biggest issue, but we'll just run that length of wire and we'll be okay.
Yeah. There will be a lot of new stuff in the interior section of the harness, because that's where we're like stealing all of the extra lengths of wire from at the moment. But when we cut those off, it will be easy to repopulate the existing stuff because there's actually not that many connectors inside the car. Yeah. You know, you have the body control module, you have the fuse box, and then a couple of little odds and ends. Yeah, a handful of other modules, and then you have the dash and HVAC and stuff like that. Right. But it's really kind of Spartan in there. So we're fortunate in that, and the P1 and the 650S actually share the same tub. The problem that we ran into was that, see, here is the fuse box. This is the main fuse box for the 650S. This is from the front to the back of the car. This sits behind the driver's seat. On the P1, this actually sits in the passenger seat footwell. So if we were to make one big harness, we would have to extend a bunch of wires from here to here, and that's really hard because look how many wires like that. We'd have to do all of this.
These are all power wires, signal wires, and what have you. And this is going to make things much, much easier because now we just make this from whole cloth. And it seems daunting, but this is, I think, the easiest way to do it right now.
Yeah, I would agree. You know, the nice thing about splitting it up is that now we can basically isolate the four corners, which are the four main sections of the harness, well, out of 5. But, you know, as you can see on the table here, you know, I did this entire corner. I laid everything out exactly where it's supposed to go, tidied everything up, fixed all the grounds, fixed all the powers, and now this corner is completely done. So I cannot think about this at all, and I can think about the next one little section that I have to fix.
Yeah.
Instead of being overwhelmed by this massive pile of wires that you somehow have to turn into a running, driving car.
This car is different. I mean, you're going to know that the P1 is different than any other McLaren. Here's why it's different. So in a 650S, you have 2 basic ECUs or computers. You have the engine computer, you have the ECU, and then you have what's called a PCCU, which is a powertrain control unit. It has chassis control, and it also has the transmission controller integrated into it. Now, the P1 actually has 3. So it has an ECU, a TCU, a transmission control unit, and a CCU, which is a chassis control unit. And the chassis control unit, it controls the hydraulics for the suspension. It has active aero stuff, and like everything is sort of jumbled together, and you have to wire all that separately. Now, I thought we can just separate these things and it'll be okay, but turns out there's actually a lot more to it because the 720 harness that we had, 720 is a newer car, it was made in 2020, that actually does have 3 ECUs, the ECU, TCU, and CCU. But this is the CCU wiring, right? This is it, yep. And this is, as you can tell, well, you can't really tell, but as you can imagine, completely different from a P1. So none of these wires actually go to anything in the P1. So each of these wires will have to be custom coded, custom tailored to this harness. So it almost didn't matter that we were doing, you know, a 720 mixed with a 650S, other than maybe just using some connectors.
Yeah, and you know, being this far into it and using the 720S as a donor harness, I have found a lot of damage in that harness. That car was in a pretty bad wreck.
Yeah.
Lots of cut wires, smashed connectors. The CCU connectors I just found are like ground down, like somebody drug the CCU down the street at 80 miles an hour.
Yeah, that's fine.
So, you know, there's a lot of stuff that we would have had to replace and cut out anyways. This harness, the 650S, was in much better mechanical condition.
Yeah.
And it was kind of 6 of one, half dozen of the other, which one was a closer match to the P1.
Like looking at this, it just seems impossible. But there are a lot of similarities, like things like the headlights. The headlights are exactly the same. I mean, they're literally 650S headlights. We have, you know, stuff like this, which is the key transponder. You know, that is exactly the same. We have the underdash connectors here, the ones that go into the body control module under the dash. Those are exactly the same. And a bunch of other stuff like audio. Audio is very, very similar because they use the same systems. They use the same head unit, that sort of thing. Even the fuse box itself, even though it's not in the same position, that is exactly the same. The fuse box in the front uses the same type of battery. So we were pretty lucky in that a lot of these connectors are still used, but the P1 has thrown us a lot of curveballs in that it has modules that have never been used on any other car, and then it has stuff like the active aero in the front that no other McLaren has. And I think not a lot of people, even P1 owners, don't know that it has active aero in the front. So it's just been a giant learning experience. But I'm glad that we're sort of, I'm not going to say we're in the home stretch, but right now there is definitely light at the end of the tunnel. Because, man, for a while there, we were like, is this even possible? You know?
Yeah, it was pretty overwhelming in the beginning, and now, you know, like I said, the rear is basically complete. Right now I'm working on this front right corner, and if you look closely, you can see most of this is actually done and laid out where it's supposed to be. This ACU actually goes over here, but I just put that there. But as I'm going through, working my way through, I'm taping all of the sections of harness together where they join together, so that as I work back towards the bulkhead where we're going to eventually cut it, I can make sure everything is at the correct length, in the correct position, attached to the correct sections of wire. And that way, when we cut it, I put a connector on it, put it in the car, everything fits to where it's supposed to be.
So this is where we get into the nitty gritty, and we get really, really technical. So if you're not a geek or a wiring nerd, then stick around. Maybe you'll learn something. I don't know. But Adam is going to explain all the differences that he had to put into this harness. And not only the differences, I mean, we're also trying to make things a little bit more streamlined, meaning that stuff like this, like a ground, like 2 grounds that go into one. There's no reason why we can't have more than that going into one connector, because the ground is a ground. So if you have, like 6 grounds going into the body at any different in close proximity, we can all just kind of put them into one like solid ground, right?
Correct. As long as you're, not making it harder on yourself. The idea is to simplify the grounding structure right now, because there's some stuff that passes through the bulkhead. There's stuff that connects to stuff that's over here and over there and all over the place. You get these odd bundles of wire that just go in every direction, and it's a mess. So we're going to simplify that, take a bunch of that stuff out, make it nice and clean. We'll have 1 or 2 ground points on each corner of the car, and if something stops working in the car, if a whole section goes out, to look at the grounds, because they're all grounded together.
Yes.
If one thing goes out, it's more likely that it's something at that one device. So from a troubleshooting perspective, I find that combining grounds into sections of the car makes it a lot easier for figuring out if something's going wrong.
So for those of you that don't know, it's a really, really quick primer. On a 12-volt DC, that's a direct current system that mostly all cars have, you have a power wire and a ground wire. And the power wire and the ground wire have to create a circuit, and that's how you have power to flow. So the ground is just directly connected to the chassis, and then the power wire is they're both connected to the battery, but one's connected to the positive, one's connected to the negative. Now, one thing that some people would say is that there's a reason why these grounds are separate. Because of, let's say, signal cleanliness. Like if you have a signal that needs to be super clean for, let's say, a sensor, and then you have a ground that's shared with a lot of other grounds, it could introduce noise. So we're not doing that for those grounds. Like there are some grounds that are straight off from a sensor. We're just doing it on grounds like this. Like that just look ugly and are clearly already tied together from the factory, and it doesn't really matter. It's not going to change anything.
Yeah, and on top of that, being that we're adding and removing so many different things, we're having to redo a lot of the grounds regardless. So even if we didn't want to touch them, because of the nature of what we're doing, there's a lot of stuff that we just have to take out.
So what have you taken out? You already know that we've taken out the hybrid drive assembly, but what does that actually mean for a harness?
It's pretty complicated. I can start from the sort of the front of the car,
Yes.
and we'll work our way back.
Yeah,
So we'll go over here to the CCU harness, which is part of the 720S. It's had a little run-in with the ground, and this one was just broken.
Okay,
so,
you know what? That's okay. I feel like you could just that'll buff.
A little Bondo over it.
Yeah, a little
no one
Bondo.
will
I think
ever know.
Jack could take care of that. Yeah.
Yeah, straight out of Bondo. So this is the CCU. This controls the chassis stuff for the 720S. But in the McLaren P1, there's a lot of stuff that's different. A lot of different sensors, additional sensors that the 720S doesn't have, and then it also controls the front active arrow in the P1, which, again, the 720S doesn't have. So I actually have to build that in from scratch, which we'll get to at some point. We're just not quite there yet. So moving on from there, we're going to go back over to the 650S.
Okay.
There were a lot of differences in the 650S versus the P1, especially in the front. A lot of devices that were on opposite sides of the car for some reason. I did have to change all of the door connectors. They were all different from the P1 to the 650S, so I've changed those. There's a lot of stuff in here that is on the 650S that isn't in the P1, like this connector doesn't go to anything in the P1, so we're just going to eliminate this. All the battery stuff is thankfully in the same location.
Yes, the battery is they use the same subframes, so where the battery mounts and all that stuff is still the same.
Yeah, yeah, and like all of the electric over hydraulic power steering stuff is the same. The stability control unit is the same from both cars. The body control module, the physical computer is exactly the same. All the connectors are exactly the same. The pinouts for every single connector are different between the 650S and the P1 and the 720S.
Sick.
All different. So I got to compare all three diagrams and figure out how to move everything from where it is to where it needs to be and not lose track of it all. And that's a nightmare. It's terrible.
Yeah.
But we are getting through it. We have been very successful in that. And going from like our original plan of building one large harness to breaking it up into smaller pieces does actually open a lot of doors and make the body control module rewire a lot more straightforward. As Freddie had explained, we do have to relocate the entire fuse box from the back of the car up to the front of the car. So we're going to be basically depinning this entire thing, which is removing every single pin out of this fuse box, moving it, and then creating all new wiring from here out to each corner of the car and to all of the little bits in between. We also have to repin the entire occupancy restraint controller, which is what controls your airbags and stuff.
Huh. Why?
Because everything is shorter and longer.
Good.
It's pinned exactly the same.
It's both shorter and longer.
Yes,
I like that.
It's both.
Hello, ladies. I am both shorter and longer. So great. The thing is, this is where the battery used to live in the P1, and now it doesn't live there anymore. And it's really interesting because the battery didn't actually have that many connectors going to it. It had a handful, but they were sort of on their own system. And the battery just had one big positive cable going towards it, and then it went off to a few different modules. But that wasn't actually that hard to divorce from the P1 system, right?
Correct. Well, and it also helps that this car didn't originally have it. So we're really only having to add in extra stuff. So all of the hybrid stuff was already not here.
Yes.
So we didn't have to eliminate really much of that stuff. There's a little bit of stuff we had to eliminate out of the chassis control stuff, but as far as hybrid is concerned, we just don't put those extra connectors in.
And also, what a lot of people don't know is that the hybrid drive assembly was the starter and alternator for the P1. The P1 doesn't have a starter, it doesn't have an alternator. You press that start button and an electric relay actually turns the motor from the e-motor. And we don't have that here, so we just have to make sure that it has starter, alternator, all that stuff wired up, and it'll be good to go, I think. The fun fact is, on a P1, if you actually look at the wiring harness, the wiring diagram, all it needs to start is a crank signal. Like, all it needs to know is that the engine's turning. Doesn't matter how that engine turns. So essentially, if I still have a P1 ECU, I can make that work with a traditional starter, and then we can charge it with a traditional alternator.
Right, but we don't have a P1 ECU because that would be too easy.
Yeah, that would be way too easy because what we're doing is a 720S engine, and the difference between the 720S engine and the P1 engine is, well, the 720S engine is like almost 10 years newer, and it has double the injectors. So instead of having 8 fuel injectors, it has 16. And you do that for a variety of reasons. When you have higher boost, you have more injector, more fuel, bigger bang, that sort of thing. It's also safer. You have redundancies, but that also comes with added cost, meaning that there's more wires to go around.
But wait, there's more.
But wait, there's more.
Because the 720S also doesn't have some of the features that the P1 had, because the P1 has all these extra fans, all these extra hydraulic motors and stuff, which are controlled by the ECU. So we're going to have to do some custom coding in the factory ECU to enable those extra outputs that it didn't have.
Yeah, that's going to be a lot of fun because the 720 had like air to water heat exchangers for a few things, like the transmission. The transmission just had a cooler block on the side of it, and that's what made it cool the fluid. But the P1 actually has lines going to a radiator and. You okay?
Keep talking, man. I don't want to get in the shot.
All right. Tommy, we gotta lock that door. We gotta. These guys keep coming in, and like we can't. Now take a look at this. This is just a few pages of what Adam's been going through. This is some P12 diagrams, and thankfully I got these from some very good friends. I won't discuss who those friends are because they'll probably get into trouble, but these are the diagrams for the P1. We have diagrams for the P11, which is a 650S and 675 LT, and then we have the diagrams for a P14, which is a 720S. And if that sounds geeky to you, then welcome to the club. Now, past this, there's also other harnesses that plug into here, and then that goes into the tail lights, and then that goes into the transmission and all the other coolers, because these things have way more cooling. The P1 has way more cooling than the 650S or 720S. I think they anticipated it going on track and doing some really amazing stuff, and we certainly need all of that cooling. So we have to make sure everything here works. The real number for a McLaren harness, if you were to get one, is about $17,000 to $25,000 to get it from McLaren. Now, that takes between 6 months and a year. And then you would have a harness that is completely stock to the car, and you would still have to do essentially this, because you have to take out the hybrid drive assembly, you have to add wires for the 720, you have to do a lot of stuff. So we're kind of cutting out the middleman and making our own, our own adventure here. Not only that, we're also making it way more accessible because we'd have to do all the bulkhead connectors and all that stuff. So it really wouldn't be a lot easier if we had started with a P1 harness to begin with, because we'd have to do all the back tracing anyway. Like, all this stuff would have had to been done anyway. So I think we're in a really good spot. Now, this doesn't look like it's a small amount of work, and it doesn't look like it will take a small amount of time, but we've had, like, just in the last, I'd say 4 days, Adam has finished that side. He still has a little bit to go on this side. But he's made great strides on these, and I'm really confident that he can get this done. And when he's done, then what we're going to do is we're going to tone out every pin, meaning that we're going to check for continuity on the circuits. And what that means is I'm going to sit on one side, he sits on the other side, and then I have a little probe, and I stick the probe in, he sticks the probe in on his end, and then this thing goes beep. And then we have to do that for every single pin on this harness. And it's going to be a very boring day. We'll probably have that on time lapse, so you can be bored too. So I think, is that it? I mean, is that all it takes to make a P1 harness from scratch?
No, but we don't have time to talk about everything there is to make a P1 from scratch.
We got time. We can talk about, like, what else is there?
Oh, well, I'll tell you. We had to rewire the entire fuel pump sub-harness. That had to be done. We had to rewire the TCU completely because it's TCU versus PCCU, and the pinouts are completely different. In addition to that, we had to make all of the wiring and connectors for the rear active arrow and wire that into the TCU, which is what I have going on right here. This guy, and this guy are rear arrow, and they go down here and back up to the TCU. So that's all brand new. In addition to that, I had to add in, like I said, all of the extra hydraulic controls and like the relay here that didn't exist before. I had to add that in. I had to repin the engine bulkhead connectors because they're completely different on the 720S versus the P1. I think that's mostly everything.
Yeah, I think we're in a good spot, and hopefully you don't rip all your hair out by the time this is over, because only some of it.
Only some.
That's all I
have
ask.
a little left.
What about the elephant in the room? The big elephant.
Which big elephant?
Where did you wire the VTEC controller?
So that's this guy. Whoops. This is a monumental project. If we put this in the car and it actually works, I will be not surprised because we've done everything we can possibly do to the standard that McLaren, actually a higher standard than McLaren would do. But we're also just two dudes in a garage. Like it's as much of a homebrew project as we can get.
These are diagrams from the 3 cars. So you have 650S, P1, 720S. This is only one of 4 pages for each car.
Yeah.
And so what I had to do was compare the 3 cars side by side and figure out what was different between the 3 and what changes I had to make in order to make the 650S turn into the 720S because we're not turning it into the P1, but we have to integrate some of the P1 stuff.
Yes.
It's very simple. Don't worry about it.
It's very simple. Anybody can do it. And I'm getting a little anxious just looking at this and talking about it. But I'm also very excited, and I hope you guys are excited as well, because I think that's where we're going to end this video. In the next video on the P1, we should have more of this done, and we should be putting this in the car and starting to test stuff. And hopefully, fingers crossed, we start the car for the first time and don't burn it to the ground, because I don't want to do a fire damaged on top of a flooded hypercar rebuild.
It's nothing we can't handle,
Don't say that. Don't say it is something I can't handle.
Maybe emotionally you can't handle it.
Financial, I can't handle it either. It's really expensive. All right, bye guys. All right, wrench every day.
Bye.